Hello, everybody. Many thanks for signing up to our second webinar in our new series. My name is Oliver, and I'm the lead support nurse at the UK Sepsis Trust. And I'm just going to share my screen. So bear with me a second. Okay. So thanks again for joining us today on a very hot and humid day. Today's webinar is looking at managing fatigue during recovery. You can watch our first webinar, which covered early sepsis recovery. You can find that on our website. Today's webinar will also be recorded, so you can watch it back on demand in your own time, particularly on a warm day like today. Your concentration might be reduced. We'll share this link with you by the end of the week. And hopefully today there'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers at the end of the session. So please do feel free to pop in any questions in the Q&A box and we'll have a look at those at the end. I'd also encourage you to reach out directly to us if you have any specific questions or if you'd like to discuss anything that I covered today in a little bit more detail. And we're going to cover a few important areas today. Sepsis and the challenges that people might face is a complex topic, so it is pretty impossible to cover everything in a limited time, particularly around fatigue as well. But hopefully by the end of this session, I'll have a greater understanding of what fatigue is and consider some practical steps that might help enhance yours or someone else's recovery journey. I think a good place to start, as always, is introducing myself so you know who's talking to you. I'm a registered nurse, and the majority of my clinical practice was in the Midlands. I worked in the NHS predominantly in critical care and intensive care for about 12 years before joining the charity in 2018. And I've looked after many patients in my clinical practice with sepsis. And as part of my role for the charity, I help support those affected. And we speak to many hundreds of people each month. Hopefully, you know who we are as an organisation. We're a national charity. We're founded in 2012 by NHS consultant Dr. Ron Daniels, who's our Chief Medical Officer and still works as an intensivist here in the Midlands. And our mission there is to end preventable deaths from sepsis and improve outcomes for people affected. And as you can see here, we do that in a few different ways. I also think it's helpful to remind ourselves what sepsis is and what's happening when someone has sepsis. And this can sometimes help to explain some of the challenges that people might face after, including fatigue. So if we just remind ourselves, and we'll start with the official lay definition, it states that sepsis is a life-threatening condition that arises when the body's response to an infection injures its own tissues and organs. And a common misconception is often that sepsis is an infection in itself, or you can catch sepsis, but that's not the case. And importantly here, the definition focuses on the body's response to an infection and not the infection itself, always triggered by an infection. And it's when the immune system, which normally works to protect us, goes into overdrive. And if we don't stop it, then it can cause problems with our blood supplies, with our cells, tissues, and organs, and it can, of course, make us acutely very unwell. Sepsis primarily involves the immune system, and our immune system is a complex network of cells, proteins, and chemicals that all work together to protect us. And you can see there it includes things like the spleen, white blood cells, the lymphatic system, and our skin. And in sepsis, that immune response that is there to protect us becomes overwhelming. And instead of it being localized, that particular area, it can affect the whole body. It can become uncontrolled, and it can become what's called dysregulated. And in sepsis, lots of immune chemicals are released into the bloodstream that will help us fight infection, which then triggers a series of inflammatory reactions and can cause systemic inflammation. This can cause a drop in blood pressure and then change, as mentioned, how blood and therefore oxygen and nutrients are distributed around the body. And then this could impact the function of some of our cells, tissues, and organs in the body. And this can, of course, result in us acutely feeling very unwell, but it will also contribute to the symptoms and challenges people can experience after, including fatigue. So, what is fatigue? Well, fatigue can be difficult to describe, which can be hard for those experiencing it to try and understand, but then also when we're trying to explain to other people, our friends, our family, or at work. And as we can see here, it's described as complete physical and or mental exhaustion that is not relieved by sleep or rest periods. And importantly, fatigue is different to the tiredness that we can all experience at times. And it's very common as top of the list, really, for what people can experience after sepsis. And in the most part, it's somewhat expected following any acute illness. And whilst your journey is unique to you, for most people, it will improve over time as you get better and maybe start to manage your symptoms more effectively. For some people, fatigue can continue for weeks, months, or even years, and that can obviously make recovery significantly more challenging. And it can range from mild to extreme, and the signs and symptoms often will take many forms. It will vary, and it does vary from person to person, but some of the most common symptoms can include being very weak, feeling very weak and excessively tired all the time, feeling dizzy, faint, and sweating, muscle and or joint pain, finding it hard to sleep, and then importantly, not feeling refreshed when you wake or after that rest period. And then the cognitive elements are problems with concentration, attention, focus, and memory. And it's important to remember when we're thinking about fatigue, it has a close relationship with energy and activity. Our energy is our fuel, if you like, that enables us to perform activities. And activity doesn't just mean taking out time to go to exercise. Anything that we do that requires energy counts as an activity. It could be a physical task like making a cup of tea, going up the stairs, having a shower, walking. It could be a cognitive task that like reading, listening to a podcast, maybe concentrating on an email or a piece of paper, or talking on the phone, or possibly an emotional task like worrying, speaking about your experience maybe with friends and family, or indeed a health professional. And if we keep that in mind and remember that everything we do requires energy and counts as an activity, that can help kind of keep in mind and help us to understand where we might be using our energy at any given time and during any given task. So why is it, an important question, why is it that some people commonly experience fatigue following sepsis? And as I say, it's at the top of the list there, what people can experience. And we don't fully understand why some people experience fatigue after sepsis, and the precise science remains largely uncertain. If you remember earlier, we explored what's happening when we have sepsis and the effect of that inflammation on the body's cells, tissues, and organs, which naturally includes our brain and our muscles, but also the very nature of being in hospital and the physical deconditioning which occurs when we have an acute illness and then a subsequent period of inactivity. That will also contribute to the weakness and fatigue commonly experienced. If we're not using those particular muscles, those particular muscle groups, then they can very quickly lose strength and then become further deconditioned. So now I'm just going to touch on some steps to consider that may well help and manage your fatigue during your recovery. So, as previously mentioned, I think it's important is not to be surprised when we leave hospital if that tolerance to activity is reduced and we have new physical limitation. It's generally considered normal and somewhat expected, particularly in those early stages of recovery. The first thing we encourage is to start by stopping. So pressing pause for a moment on your life where you can, and doing a real honest appraisal to give a real insight as to where you are at the moment and can help establish your current baseline. Trying to work out the level of activity you can currently do comfortably without excessive fatigue. And as mentioned, this will likely be significantly reduced compared to your previous level of activity. For example, if following a 20-minute walk on the flat at a steady pace, you find that you're incredibly weak, excessively sweating, very breathless, and then forced to rest for a lengthy period of time, this is usually evidence that this is currently too much. So consider doing maybe 10 minutes and see how then that makes you feel and any symptoms you experience. And then gradually building up as tolerated. And of course, being guided by your symptoms and recovery time. Often adopting that kind of pushing on through regardless of the symptoms can often be detrimental, and evidence will tell us it's ideally not something we do. Acknowledging those limitations is really important, and of course it's not easy. And acknowledgement doesn't mean accepting and giving up, but more just that gentle acknowledgement of where you are at the moment and how you can best support yourself through this process. And people will commonly tell us that when they learn to do this, things can often feel much lighter. So that acknowledgement of, okay, this is where I'm at. I don't like it, but how can I just support myself through this process? Rather than that fighting and keeping on pushing, it can, as mentioned, often be detrimental. But see that it's also important to try and quieten that inner critic and not to judge yourself. Maybe avoiding phrases like, I should be able to do this, or I should be able to do that by now, or I can't do this anymore. For most people, it's a temporary phase. And also important to remember how you're feeling at the moment isn't your fault. It's a result of how incredibly poorly you were. Everyone I speak to are doing their best. So again, that inner critic can sometimes be really loud, and I think really important to acknowledge it and just try and gently quieten it down where we can. So keeping an accurate diary or an activity planner for a couple of weeks as part of that appraisal can really help you understand the baseline you're starting from. You can use it to document what you're doing, any symptoms you're experiencing, and you can include periods of rest and type of activity, fatigue, and sleep periods you're having. This information can really help you to plan and prioritize your time and future activities, along then with measuring your progress, which is really important, and then identifying possibly any key areas that you might want to discuss with your health professional. Important to find a diary or planner that works for you, create your own. And as you can see here, we have our free recovery diary, which includes templates for this purpose as well. As mentioned, it can be hugely beneficial to have something in front of us that kind of really truly paints a picture and reflects where we are at the moment. When understanding fatigue, it can be really helpful, I think, to visualize our energy as units. And this can really help make sense of your energy levels and then how then they may influence your fatigue. But it can also help when explaining to other people what it might feel like. A metaphor that's commonly used in energy management is the spoon theory. Some of you may have heard of this. Some of you, it might be a new concept, and it's a different concept if you haven't heard of it before. And it really suggests that each day you have a finite number of spoons representing your energy level. And each activity or task requires a certain number of spoons to complete it. Once those spoons are used up, then there's no way to replenish them except through restorative rest and possibly sleep. When we're well, we might have an unlimited supply of spoons, and we don't have to think about where we're using them. And our natural reserves and our sleep cycle as well will kind of replenish those spoons without us noticing. When you're recovering from sepsis and managing ongoing fatigue and pain, for example, you can start the day with a reduced number of spoons and have to be really mindful about where you're using them. As you can see here in this example, let's say you have 12 spoons for the entire day, and each planned activity costs a certain number of spoons. And here you can see how quickly they can be used up. And when you run out, as with this example, this is often then the point where you experience those kind of crashes or worsening symptoms. And here's an example, I guess, in how we might apply our spoon theory on a given day. And remember, with everything it's meant to be flexible and not set in stone. So each morning, have that kind of check-in, if you like, how many spoons do I think I have today? And of course, might vary day by day, depending on previous activity and how you're feeling. Try and plan your day based on your energy and not just tasks, which can sometimes involve saying no to things, which of course is hard, or kind of postponing certain activities. Trying not to wait until you're out of spoons before you rest. And that's often the tricky thing there. But factoring in some rest periods before you reach that point. And when rest, I often talk about consider rest as being prescribed. Often people's approach to rest is it's failing or I'm being lazy here. But particularly with fatigue and recovery, consider rest periods they're prescribed. Try and tell others, how many spoons you might have for that day. They might look at you initially and think, not sure what you're going on about here. But once you maybe explain the theory to them, it can be a really helpful way of managing their expectations of you. So, for example, you might say to somebody, "I'm low on spoons today. This is what I've got to use today, my activity." Another way you could visualize your energy is as energy bucks, if you like. The more bucks we have in the bank, the more activity we can sustain. And when we're well, we don't have to think so carefully about that energy budget. And you can draw upon your reserve or overdraft, if you like, when you need to. And then remember that following sepsis, that threshold or that tolerance to activity is lower. So we have fewer energy bucks to spend in the bank. And you might only have so many energy bucks to spend that day. And therefore, it's about being mindful about how you're spending them. And we'll touch a little bit of that in a moment. And often a lot of people kind of front load their day. So they kind of use up everything, for example, in the morning, and then feel like they've got nothing left in the bank in the afternoon. It's normally better to kind of spend small bits at a time and then topping them up as you go along. And when it comes to fatigue and energy management, we often talk about the three Ps. There are other Ps that we could add in there, but I think these are the really three most important things here. And the first one is prioritization. So really think about what needs to be done. Most of us will have things going on in our life that's a non-negotiable. And that's different to what we think should be done. And again, that might be related to essential homework or tasks at home, or work. Maybe other people are reliant upon us. These activities that we feel is a priority and we deem as more important, and then we prioritize spending some of that energy budget on. If then we've got things left in our energy bank or spoons left, then we can look down at what we would like to do, not what we think we should do. So it's often just that process of, right, what have I got going on? Again, part of that appraisal. What is a priority for me at the moment? What do I need to do? And then how much of my energy bank is those activities going to use? Secondly, pacing. And pacing can be quite a difficult concept to understand and to kind of really feel like you're getting to grips with. But pacing is all about balance. So managing activities and factoring in rest, even if you feel like you can do more. So spending just enough time doing an activity so you get the most out of it without pushing yourself so you use all of your energy budget and you go into your overdraft, if you like. And it can be really tempting, and I would probably do the same, when you feel like you have more energy and feel more energized on a particular day, to do too much too quickly. And that will commonly lead then to burnout or those periods of crashing fatigue. And again, just really gently remind yourself that this isn't easy, and it can take time to learn. For most people, it's learning and adopting new skills. And whenever we do that, we have to remember that that will take time, like learning a new language or learning a musical instrument. We don't just expect to be able to pick it up and do it straight away. It's going to take some practice. We have to consider what time we need to put into that. The third P is planning, really important. So trying to plan how and when you're going to do those activities, and through reflection, we can understand maybe how difficult we might anticipate them to be. This is normally easier once we start to understand our baseline and using our diary, maybe documenting what we're finding. Okay, I previously did that activity and maybe that was too much at that level. Maybe this is something I need to adjust and amend slightly, and then I can plan it in throughout my day or in my week when I feel I've got that optimum energy to be able to do that activity. I think planning also gives us certainly that a little bit of a sense of control when we feel that lots of things are out of our control. So goal setting, it can be really useful to, I guess, maintain motivation and then provide a sense of achievement as well, which is really, really important, which can in itself, when we start to achieve things, be motivational as well. It can help, but kind of gently increasing out those activities as tolerated. I think it's really important, as tolerated and guided by your symptoms. So increasing regardless, as mentioned, can sometimes be detrimental. It's increasing and being guided by your symptoms. If it's feel it's too much, then it's reducing it back down. And I think setting goals can also help us identify what we might want to focus on, and then build a plan on how we might get there. And it will commonly involve lots of smaller steps. And remember, goals might include physical goals, but then also might include social goals, like I want to connect with more people, or emotional goals as well. And importantly, your goals don't have to be at a similar level to where you were previously. For most people, that's only going to set them up to fail and lead to disappointment. So try and set those goals as achievable as possible and realistic. And start small and think smart. So most people have seen this in terms of goal setting. So it's about being very specific, what I want to do, when, and how often. It has to be measurable. So how can we measure if we're improving or not? Achievable, something that's important to you and you feel like you're going to be motivated to do that. Setting a target, which can be adapted as we get to each new step, and then putting in a specific time frame, bound by time, that we can then review and see how that progress is going. And it's important to check in with our goals at different times. A goal for me today might have changed in 2 or 3 weeks. So it's about checking in and thinking, is this still important to me? And might that end goal have changed slightly? And I've lifted this from a new fatigue resource, which is being launched in the coming weeks. And we can see here that the specific goal is to be able to walk for an hour in 3 months' time. And it follows that SMART template and really prompts us to consider how we're going to measure that over time, how achievable and realistic that goal is. And then also it's gently bound by time. It's not fixed on time. And remember that your goals are yours and they're not set in stone. So really keeping them flexible and have regular reviews. If it's no longer important or you think it's not achievable, then that's fine. It's reviewing them, and maybe something else is a little bit more important at the moment. So I've put together some top tips which many people have told us about, and evidence will suggest, and lots of people find really helpful as well. It's trying to find that delicate balance between activity and rest. Too much of either of those can become detrimental. So too much rest might lead to further deconditioning. And then too much activity, as mentioned, might lead to worsening fatigue and can become detrimental as well. So it's trying to find that delicate balance between enough activity and then enough rest. Remembering activity is anything we do that requires energy. So it might be going for a gentle walk, it might be reading a book, even us sleeping requires energy. And then cognitive and emotional activities will affect your energy levels if we consider how draining worrying can be. And along with the physical, the cognitive and emotional activities will all require to use your daily spoons or energy budget. You might consider some activities worth a blowout, and I think it's something that really lots of people say to us. So you might use all your spoons for the day, or even for a few days, and it's giving yourself permission to do this and doing it intentionally, and acknowledge that there might be a consequence of this, but that's okay. And I think some activities are worth it for some people, and on the flip side, the benefits that activity might have on their mental health can outweigh any potential worsening fatigue for a period of time. Everything should start with self-compassion and really think about how you're talking to yourself. Often we can be, as mentioned, incredibly hard on ourselves, and it's really important. So again, try and replacing with I can't do that anymore with at the moment I'm choosing not to do that. It's a subtle difference, but over time it can help to kind of shift that narrative a little bit. Trying to understand where you are and what you're working with, as mentioned. So using that diet. Find one that are complete. Celebrating those achievements, no matter how small you might consider them to be. And I think sometimes we compare again to what we were doing before, and that critic can be very loud, and we say, oh, this is ridiculous. I used to be able to do these things. And sometimes life is unpredictable and the unexpected can happen. And try not to be too hard on yourself if things fall below your expectations, despite all the best planning and preparation. That can happen. And sometimes we might find it really difficult to accept, to ask and accept for help. And for a lot of people, it doesn't come naturally to do this, but it can make a real difference. It can also help to manage other people's expectations, so trying being as open and honest with people. This is what I'm working with. These are my spoons. This is my energy budget. This is what it looks like for me. And this is the support I need from you and the help I need from you. And accepting that, again, just can help lighten that load a little bit. And don't forget to have me time and not feeling guilty to do that. Sometimes managing fatigue, managing recovery can feel all-consuming. But important to plan and schedule. This is time for me, and this is going to be really restorative. And it's maybe using that to relax, to distract from what's going on, and to switch off as much as possible. And of course, that me time might be different at the moment to what it was before, but it's still important to try and find those things what works for you. Now, for some people, they might find after a period of time symptoms persist or sometimes even get worse. And this can, of course, be worrying and very frustrating and can impact lots of different parts of our lives. If this is the case, then we'd certainly normally encourage you to speak with your GP as a starting point, just to ensure that nothing else might be contributing to some of these ongoing symptoms. If once you've done that and all possible avenues have been explored, then it might be people might need referral into more specialist fatigue services. And people we speak to that have done that can obviously can find that experience incredibly helpful, that holistic experience, to look at all these different parts and what's happening in your life and how then that can impact your fatigue and how then you can best manage it moving forward. And just to remind you how you can connect with us. Some of you may have already, but it's really easy to get in touch with us. We have a helpline. We can provide email support. And then we also have our wonderful peer support groups on Facebook, and then also our weekly online Zoom groups as well. And remember that we're here to help and support you during this process. So even if it's just for some reassurance and validation or an opportunity to just offload, that's exactly what we're here for. We're a small team, but we're incredibly enthusiastic to help and support you. And sadly, we hear from lots of people who leave hospital with little or no information or support. And then maybe when they do access help, they don't feel listened to or validated and can maybe leave any consultations feeling worse, or maybe that it's their fault. So we can help to provide that support, that non-time constrained listening ear, which for a lot of people can really go a long way. But then we can also provide, hopefully, some practical guidance and information just to help you manage those expectations, maybe the next steps on what you might choose to do, but then also providing some hope and encouragement for the future. So many thanks for joining today and for listening. A reminder that this is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand via our website, hopefully by the end of this week. Please don't hesitate to reach out directly to us if you have any specific questions or if you would like to discuss anything covered today in more detail. And I'm just going to stop sharing now. As mentioned, if you have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the function, and we can have a look at some of them as well.